Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. It's time to restart, and I'm glad to see that the attrition rate of candidates is very low. Most planning inquiries halve the audience within an hour, and any break, it doubles the reduction in the number of people here. But no doubt you are all here. I'm sure most of you know already our next speaker, Andrew Ferguson, who is probably the most knowledgeable person in Scotland on the subject of common good, and not least because he is the person, again, who wrote the book, literally, on common good. After many years of practice in local authority, he's now in his own consulting firm, so you know where to come to ask the questions. If you don't get them out today, you might have to pay him even more to answer the questions, but he's kindly agreed to speak to us today on questions arising from common good in practice, so moving from the theoretical now to even more practical advice and tips. So thank you, Andrew.
Thanks, Alasdair. And thanks also to Francesca, Mark and Scott, who have laid the foundations beautifully for the talk. So it's kind of, you know, they've survived the early fast bowling, and I can come in and just, you know, let loose. Anyone who's ever seen me batting will know that's not actually true. Confirm number 11. However, I'm batting number 10 today, and I'll try and speak as quickly as I can and make sure that Rob gets enough time. But I thought I'd start with a quick quiz and just ask if anybody recognises this character who is on a common good building somewhere in Fife, somewhere in Dunfermline. Ewan, where are you? So this is a carving on City Chambers in Dunfermline, which is very indubitably common good, purpose built in the Gothic revival style in the late 19th century. And I reckon this guy is actually a wee joke on the part of the Freemasons, or the Masons, stonemasons, who are often also Freemasons. And if you're steeped in Freemasonic conspiracy theories, this may well be the murdered apprentice, and he's holding his hand to his brow and his other hand to his breast, because that's to do with all that stuff. But I which is a whole different talk. I just like him because it's kind of the expression that we all have when we're thinking about common good. And I wanted him on the cover of the second edition. If I ever get a third edition, I think I'll insist. It was my editor, Margaret, who insisted that a play park was better on the cover than this guy. And well, she's a lovely woman, so I didn't disagree. But there we are. Couple of things. I was going to say, it's great to see so many familiar faces, and Rob and we were exchanging emails in advance of the talk, and said he reckoned everybody that has been involved in a common good case in the last 15 years is here in this room. So I am no way pegging myself as an expert. You guys will know aspects of common good in your own councils, or having given advice to councils on specific things. So I am you know, by no means the expert handing down tablets of stone here. It is very fluid and flexible, and what I'm going to talk about today really reflects that there are opinions that some stuff is from recent opinion work, and it's at the stage where we're pushing at the boundaries of what we know about common good. So you know, feel free to debate with me, or disagree with me, or get an alternative opinion. I think other opinions may be also available. So, you know, it's there's that caveat really, that you know, we all know specific things about specific titles and specific circumstances, as Scott said earlier. Many of these questions are questions of fact and law. So let's just hope there's not a bomb under this room, or else the entire flower of Scottish common good legal expertise will disappear in one single puff of smoke. Just a couple of things I was just going to refer to, not in any way to disagree with from the earlier talks, but I think Mark made a very good point about the having regard to the interests of the inhabitants, and you put up on the slide the wording of the Act, which talks about those who were inhabitants of the borough, not the actual inhabitants who were in the borough in 1975. Obviously, some of them are no longer with us, but within the area of the borough in 1975. And obviously, there are old West maps and so on you can refer to as to where that then borough boundary was. And it is something that came up recently in a question to me, that there was an elected member in a council who said, well, can we, give common good grants to this lot who, inevitably boroughs move on and expand, and there are areas that are out with that original borough boundary, and my response was, well, yes, you can, but in doing so, you need to have regard to the interests of the people within the original borough boundary. What's in it for them? And if there's nothing in it for them, it's really quite difficult to justify spending the money. That is I think, I saw some nodding heads. I think that's a thing that can trouble us at times. Also, Mark, I think it was Mark that mentioned how each former borough should, in the accounts, have its own wee common good account, and I agree with that. Just going back to Dunfermline, when I moved to Dunfermline shortly after the last local government reorganisation, I discovered that the Common Good Fund of Dunfermline, Cowdenbeath and Inverkeithing had all been conjoined, and I said to my then boss, who was a lovely man, why did you do that? And did you get any legal advice about whether it was a great idea? And he said, oh, yes, we got Council's opinion. And he eventually, somewhat reluctantly, dug me out the Council's opinion, which to me said exactly the opposite of you should conjoin the Common Good Fund. However, it is there. We have it in Fife, in Dunfermline, and it kind of operates from in its own way. So I'm going to start with an old chestnut. Can you create a new common good asset? And I don't know why people describe me as an expert. There's no answer to that in even the second edition of Common Good Law. So what kind of book do you call that doesn't answer one of these things that people ask you all the time? Frankly, I'm trying to do the opposite of the excellent sales job that my learned colleagues have made of my book. But it's something that comes up, I think, from time to time when people leave money. And there was mention of trusts. In my experience in Fife, and I suspect it's the same, well, I know it's the same in some other councils, trusts and bequests tends to be a thing that accountants and councils lump together. And they say, well, they're trusts and bequests, and they don't really, they're thinking like accountants rather than like lawyers. Well, they're all trusts and bequests. And you say, well, what's a bequest? Well, that's up to you to work out. Certainly in the case of Fife, there was what had been treated as a bequest, but definitely wasn't a trust in St Andrews, where I said they meant to leave it to the common good, just stick it in the Common Good Fund. And funnily enough, nobody objected. But to try and put a veneer of some sort of legal justification on that, I would say you're looking at things in a slightly different way in relation to heritable property and non-heritable. So Lord Mackay and Ruth and Cattle, who you've heard about already, talks about accessions to the common good, and in Guild that word accession was used in a specific property sense of branch trustees against branch trustees of stuff that was built on common good ground acceding to it. But in my view, there was maybe Lord Mackay meant something else, and he just meant stuff that had gone into the Common Good Fund at various points. So there's nothing in the 1973 Act that says you can't now, today, transfer movable property into common good, and it's usually money rather than anything else. But there's nothing that specifically says you can. And if you recall the Portobello Park case, just because that doesn't say you can't isn't really a great argument, because the court in that case took the view that there should be specific wording that says, yes, you can do that. In the end of the day, I tend to take a fairly relaxed view about this, because who's going to challenge you putting money into the Common Good Fund? Usually the locals are really quite happy about that. It would be different, of course, if you had a specific trust that was set up, and you had the remnants of the family saying, here, hang on a minute, it was set up for this specific purpose, set of trust purposes. It wasn't set up to be punted into the Common Good Fund and used for whatever common good funds are used in general in that area. In terms of heritable property, this is a bit of a convoluted argument, which I'm not going to spend a long time on, but essentially the Local Government Scotland Act 1973 has Part 6, which is about acquisition and disposal and appropriation of property generally, and some of it talks about common good and some of it doesn't. But I have constructed a somewhat tortuous argument that Section 71 talks about councils acquiring, for the purposes of any of their functions under this or any other enactment. Doesn't say statutory functions, but it obviously implies that, or the benefit, improvement or development of their area, they can acquire heritable property. Section 73 says a local authority may appropriate for the purpose of any function, whether statutory or otherwise, land vested in them for the purpose of any other such function. So if for some mad reason your local members decided that they wanted to acquire a bit of land and put it in the common good, I think there is probably a tortuous argument you could use. Section 71, acquire it for the benefit, improvement or development of your area, and then use Section 73 to move it into the common good. If any of you were ever wondering about that, and I have been asked it occasionally, that's my tortuous argument for saying yes, you can. Another chap from the City Chambers, and this could be the expression that's on my face when I discover some other stuff I didn't know. I was thinking about Donald Rumsfeld the other day. I don't know how many of you remember him. He was Defence Secretary or something of that nature during the Bush administration at the time of the Iraq War. And who knew that we would be looking back affectionately towards people like George W. Bush and Donald Rumsfeld's paragons of American politics, but compared to the current lot. In any event, he had a famous saying about there are things you know that you know, there are other things you know you don't know, and then the things that really stuff you up are the things you didn't know. And he was kind of mocked at the time, but I think it's a pretty good saying, and certainly in the case of common good. There is some other stuff I didn't know until I was asked. And then I came up with sometimes quite tortuous answers. So I think a common thing in a lot of council areas is sports facilities where you will maybe have the general playing fields or a park. Over the years, bits of it become dedicated to particular things. So, you know, I'm a fan of cricket, and those of you know anything about cricket, it needs to have a particular pitch, the bit in the middle, which is called the wicket, has to be prepared in such a way that the ball doesn't take your head off every second delivery. So there's a certain amount of preparation goes into that and dedication to it. I remember playing cricket in Town Hill, which is within the Dunfermline Common Good area, on a number of occasions, and the locals used to like to practice their golf on the wicket, which made even medium pace bowling somewhat challenging. But I'm using that analogy. Rugby is another thing where you want to have a pitch. You might well have a rugby club that then says, well, we're doing quite well, we want to build a grandstand, etc., etc. And what tends to happen over the years is that parts of what is often common good, parkland, get given off and given exclusive use. It's not always entirely exclusive use, because the locals might still want to play their sports over it at times when the big club is not playing on their match days. So there's often a mix of public use and dedication to a particular sports club or something like that. So in that situation, do you, if you have a long lease to, let's say, a rugby club, does that mean the sports facility has become inalienable? Having originally been part of an inalienable park. So I had to look at this recently, and I took the view, leases divide property rights in two. So you have the landlord's part and you have the tenant's part. If the lease comes to an end, the landlord gets the whole property rights back. The public may still have access, albeit on a limited basis. But my view was, if you're renewing to what is substantially the same tenant, say same rugby club just wants a new lease because the other ones run out, it's arguable there's no need for court consent because the pass has already been sold. And there's some justification for that in an old case, Patterson against the Magistrates of St Andrews, which was to do with the famous Links golf course before it was shuffled off to the Links Trust. But that's another story that John Watchman can tell you all about. And there had been houses built on what had been part of the course 40 years before, and the judges basically said, well, they've got away with that, so that's, you know, that's fine. And I think there is an argument to say, if there's been continuous use of some kind by a sports club for more than 20 years, you're probably in safe ground in not having to take a Section 75 petition. However, I do take the view with all of these things, the safest route always is to take a Section 75 petition if you're in any doubt. And also, just going back to the issue of consultation, even if it's a renewal, I would probably consult under the 2015 Act now, just because it's safer. What have you got to lose? You know, you consult, you've asked the community what they think about it. Unless the sports club has absolutely, made themselves pariahs amongst the local community, they'll probably say, oh, that's fine. It's a rugby club before, let's keep it as a rugby club. But I would always advise that you should consult. Again, we've covered, Francesca covered consultation in some detail, and I know that Rob's going to talk about it as well. There's a couple of opinions I gave which were, I thought, quite interesting. One is, when you're setting a council budget now, the leaves are turning in the trees. This is the time of year, you will all know if you work in councils, that the accountants start to look nervous, and they come to the other departments and say, oh, what you thought last year was a budget crisis. This year, it's 10 times worse. We're going to have to make swinging cuts. Everybody's going to be out of a job, and there's great wailing and gnashing of teeth. And then when you get to spring, the accountants are feeling a bit more cheerful and funnily enough, find some money down the back of a sofa, and they say, "Oh, the cuts aren't going to be as bad as we thought they were." But before you get to spring and the accountants, feeling a bit more cheery about things, you have to consult on the council budget, and when you do that, you may well be talking about closing facilities, and again, there's often a lot of public outcry, and in this particular case, there was as part of a budget consultation, there was a proposal to close 2 leisure facilities operated at arm's length by leisure trusts, again, as is common. And I was asked whether there was a need for a Section 104 consultation as part of that budget consultation. And it is, and this is the really difficult thing, I think, about the way the 2015 Act is set up in consulting on common good things. It sets up as if that's happening in a vacuum. You could be at the same time running a community asset transfer consultation, or you could, as in this case, be running a budget consultation. I took the view that if you were going to do it, you were probably better to do it at the same time as a budget consultation. And difficult as that would be, try and blend into the overall budget consultation enough elements of the 2015 Act and the guidance to make it a legitimate 2015 Act consultation at the same time. Because if you don't do that, you take the budget decision, and if the accountants haven't found enough money down the back of the sofa, you're having to close the facility. Well, what's the point in doing a 2015 Act consultation then? Everybody's going to say, well, the pass has been sold. You've said there's no money in the budget to keep these things running. Why on earth are you consulting now about closing it? Because it's too late. So that was the advice I gave. And as regards the Guild case, I'm going to disappoint you, Alasdair. I'm not going to disagree radically with what Scott said about it. I mean, again, when the umpire says you're out, then absent a review system, television review system, and you read about it in the paper next day, you were out, whether or not you felt you were out or not. And in Guild, there was a dissenting judgment by Lord Malcolm. I did hear through contacts that those advising the council thought there were prospects of an appeal to the Supreme Court, and that Lord Malcolm's judgment might be favoured. But at the end of the day, Angus Council had neither the will nor probably the budget to take it to the Supreme Court. And in the end of the day, Lord Mingus's judgment that Scott referred to is really the last word in the matter. And in Guild, Lord Mingus said a proposal for change about which one might expect the residents to have a view was basically that was the test. Should you consult or should you not consult? Well, will the residents have a view about it? And again, those of you who work in local government will know residents have views about lots of things. Sometimes about things you thought they wouldn't give a flying banana about, but actually they care deeply about. So always safer to consult. One thing just that was really occurring to me as we were listening to the talks earlier on, I thought for a long time that guidance, which from memory came out in something like July 2018, just after the sections were brought into effect. I always think, I've experienced this a few times in local authorities and in my work since, that things that are possibly quite controversial, like regulations or guidance that the Scottish Government have consulted on, tend to just come out just at holiday time. And I don't think I'm not a conspiracy theorist. I don't think it's because they're trying to just, sweep it under the radar. I think it's just like all of us. They're desperate to get away on holiday. So stuff will come out in late June before the school holidays start, or it'll come out in December, just when everybody's trying to get their desk cleared before. Anyway, I don't think the guidance is very good. I think it could be clearer. And if Solar have a mind to do it, I'd be very happy to participate in trying to persuade the Scottish Government that we should have a review of it. But change of use, just to go back to an earlier question, the change of use provisions say in relation to cash funds, change of use would not cover every payment to different people or moving investments about. So common good fund does include cash and usually investments, which is, to try and keep the fund growing. So there's no suggestion that every time you, as is common, you sack your current financial advisors and get a new one on board, you don't need to consult on that. But it says changing the rules about what type of things could be funded would be something you would want to consult on. So that's, again, something that residents do have a strong view on. If you say, no, we're not funding your hanging baskets or anything else this year, it's only going to be things that are are linked to poverty relief, or there might be a different policy change that you would want to make. I think you would need to consult. So I think that could be much better defined. We've got the guidance from Guild now, but it's not. It's perhaps still a wee bit unclear, and perhaps the guidance could be updated there. In terms of dual consultations, which I was talking about earlier, if you're consulting on a budget at the same time, or if you're consulting more commonly with a CAT transfer in the wings, community asset transfer, sorry, no, not actually transferring a CAT, because that would be ridiculous. No cats belong to the common good; they're their own animals. But if you were consulting on something else, some guidance on how you go about that, particularly I think in relation to community asset transfers, it's part of the same legislation, but there's really no linkage between the two in either legislation or the guidance. And the other thing I think the guidance could do with a bit of a tune-up on is it says you consult, you seem to consult only on one single proposal, which I think probably goes against the gunning principles. And once you've reached the end of that, if you then change your mind, presumably as a result of the consultation, you go back to the bottom of the ladder and you have to consult all over again, which could be a never-ending loop of amending your proposals. And I do feel that's a bit unfair on local authorities. If they've listened to the consultation responses and then decided to go a different way, why do they need to consult again? Could they not just then get on with it? So for what it's worth, that's what I feel about that. Just Alasdair, as I say, keep me right on time. Right, okay.
I haven't given 10.
Well, I'll try and speak sensibly about these. Can land acquired for statutory purposes ever become common good? So, as you heard earlier, former borough property has either been acquired in a specific trust, or it's been acquired for statutory purposes. And there's lots of good examples of the types of legislation we're talking about, where increasingly during the 19th century, rates income was used to acquire property, and therefore it wasn't part of the common good, which eventually led to the general fund that we have now being a much bigger pot of money than the common good fund. The common good fund shrinking to only a few assets. But if it's been acquired for statutory purposes, can it ever become common good? And again, I don't hold the absolute answer on this, and be happy to hear alternative views from my colleagues or yourselves. But in this particular case, land had been acquired under Water Acts in the 19th century to do with drainage, I think. It was a kind of drainage scheme. And that had been done in the 19th century. Victorians were great for their infrastructure, the aqueduct and all that. After that, part of it had been dedicated to a private golf club. Part of it had been used for walking and other general recreation. Part of it had been allocated to allotments. And after a lot of holding my hand to my head and the other hand there, I took the view that a private golf club isn't public recreation. So you have golf clubs where you can pay and play and you don't have to be a member of the club. But this was very much, you have to be a member of this private club to play at all. You had to join the club. So it wasn't public recreation in the general sense. So to my mind, that hadn't in any way morphed into common good. The bit which was round the perimeter, which had been used for walking general recreation, I took the view the statutory purpose had kind of come to its natural end, leaving aside things like the critical down rules and so on. The only purpose now was a common good type purpose of general recreation. The allotments, on the other hand, allotments are a creature of statute, so they had moved from one statute and appropriated it to another statutory purpose. So I didn't have any qualms about that. And just briefly, because again, some of this is covered, has been covered already. Scott mentioned the situation with an access in around Perth Harbour, and I was also involved in that case, very much in the background, looking at the titles. And after extensive research, which I have to give credit to the title searchers, not to me for that extensive research, we kind of came to a view that in the patchwork quilt that was the ownership of the harbour, the particular bit of metal track that was causing all the angst was actually common good. But my view was that it was probably part of the borough charter, but there were no recreational purposes in recent times to indicate it was any sort of inalienable common good. So, as Scott says, the case eventually went away for other reasons. The second one is kind of the flip side of that, where I was asked to comment on a public park which had been specifically narrated in the disposition as having been acquired under the Parks Scotland Act 1878. Now, I don't know about you, but I've very, very, very rarely seen a disposition where in favour of a council where they refer to a specific bit of legislation. Hutton, in his commentary on the 1947 Local Government Act, said it was a great idea. Unfortunately, Mr. Hutton was, the horse had bolted by then. Nobody had done it for the previous 100 years. So you're left to wonder, again, going back to Mark's part of the talk, you're left to wonder and look at old minutes if you've got them and various other facts and circumstances as to how it got acquired and what it was for. In this case, it was very clear it was acquired under the Parks Scotland Act 1878. And the more I looked at this specific bit of legislation, I should stress, it was this specific bit of legislation, it was very clear that it had been set up to allow councils to acquire recreational land using rates money rather than using the Common Good Fund. So in my view, it had been acquired for that purpose. It was still being used in line with the statutory purpose. So in that particular case, I took the view it's it walks like a duck, it talks like a duck, and it's not common good. And very nearly finally, problem with townhouses. This was a recent application for a community asset transfer of a former borough chambers. It was gifted by the bank to trustees because the borough hadn't actually been got going yet. The borough was created under the Borough Police Scotland Act 1892. And once the borough came into existence, it was then transferred onto them in terms of the Police Scotland Act 1892. So was it a statutory acquisition and therefore not common good? We'd already treated it as common good. It's been used, as I say, this is the flip side of the previous example, been used for a common good type purpose. Was it inalienable? purpose of using it as a borough chambers, this local government reorganisation is long gone. So it was surplus to requirements. But again, I think Scott said, the test is a question, does a question arise? In Marks and Spencer against Kirkcaldy Borough, the court took a very relaxed view. As long as you had found an alternative place and you didn't interfere with the dignity of the borough, and the councillors could go about their business in another set of buildings, yes, you could sell the former borough chambers to, in the Kirkcaldy case, to Marks and Spencer. So it's a tricky one, but I took the view that probably if there is no sustained opposition to the proposed CAT transfer, if the community is squarely all behind it, it's probably a low risk. And I think in all of these things where you're at the edges, it's a risk-based assessment. What's the risk? Do you have a community that are up in arms and are going to judicially review you? Well, in that case, you're putting the council at considerable risk of considerable expense, whether you win the case or not. Are you just as well just to take it through a Section 75 petition? And finally, this is the last carver. He looks a lot more happy. I don't think he's bothered about common good. I think he would just take a sword to common good. I don't know, it's going to be William Wallace or what, there's a Dunfermline connection, or Robert the Bruce, somebody with a moustache anyway. Yeah, and again, I think Rob is going to talk about the bust of Sir John Gordon in his talk. So I'll not say much, but just to say, in 1728, Sir John Gordon was touring Italy as people did then, doing the grand tour, and he came across Edme Bouchardon, who decided to make a bust of him. It was bought by Invergordon Town Council in 1930. It was then mislaid and was discovered propping up a door in an industrial estate 26 years ago. And it then they decided to sell it, and they got court approval using Section 75, despite the fact that Section 75 is clearly about heritable property and not movable property. So I don't know, it's a great precedent to follow, but well done, Highland Council, for convincing the sheriff. I mean, they were kind enough to share the writ with me, and it kind of says, we know Section 75 doesn't really cover this, but could you just do it anyway, because everyone's behind it? So got 2.5 million for it, apparently, according to the BBC. And you've already heard about Granton Town Square. So I think, just in conclusion, in terms of disposal of stuff, it's a risk-based approach. But if in doubt, for now, always consult. What's the worst thing that can happen if you do? And that's me. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Andrew, and we'll have questions after Rob has spoken, so, and we'll stay around for that. And I think Mark and Scott will join us again if you've thought of any questions over the break. Our final speaker today is Rob McIntosh, who I'm sure you all are familiar with, Principal Solicitor at Aberdeenshire Council and the co-chair of the Solar Property and Planning Group. Rob, I think you'll see from his first slides, spent a number of years at Aberdeen City Council, twice that many years in private practice, and then that number of years plus some more back at Aberdeenshire Council. So he's very familiar with all matters to do with local authority law and is equally interested in common good. So thank you, Rob.
Yeah, actually, I probably should have retitled this as Journey as a Local Authority Solicitor, Chapter 13, Common Good Hell. The reason I put that up, I was asked to put a little bit of background, but actually the timeline is quite relevant in terms of the approach to common good. So as a newly qualified lawyer, 1996, started at Aberdeen City Council. Had a room just along there from Kevin. who's now Edinburgh Council. There was a bunch of us, and I have to be honest, every now and then we do a title report, put common good on it, and then we're promptly told, don't worry about that. And it's not a reflection on Aberdeen City Council at all. It was the attitude that common good had going back 30 years ago. It had a much lower priority. Property was being disposed of from common good assets that had been continued to be disposed of with no objection. That was the main reason that we weren't getting, because I was told, don't worry about it. But times change, and the big change was the Community Empowerment Act. Private practice, I very rarely came across it. Twice, buying property from local authorities, said, do you want to look at that title again? Because that's a common good property. And we was told, don't worry about it, we're warranting it. So fair enough. Take instructions from the client, move on. And then 2012, joined Aberdeenshire Council. And ever since then, common good has been part of my life. Strictly speaking, since 2021, when I joined the Aberdeenshire Council, I was the principal conveyancing solicitor. So obviously, common goods are part of that. 2021, I've moved on and do an infrastructure team. But as that quote is in there, there is no escape. Just when I thought I was out, they pulled me back in. Does anyone recognise the quote? No, no prize for getting it. It's Al Pacino, Michael Corleone, Godfather 3. Just when I thought I was out, they pulled me back in. So this comes with a warning. If you are getting or dabbling in common good, that is something you will not get to escape from as soon as you get involved in it. But having said that, it has resulted in some of the most challenging and interesting areas since I've joined the council. I won't go too much into the common good. That was for in fact, I'm going to try and stay away from law as much as possible. I stayed at my daughter's flat last night in Glasgow, and she had a few of her friends around, two of which were law students, and they were quite kind, said, what are you doing a talk on? Common good law. And 4 19-year-old girls looked back at me and went, yeah. And then I gave them a quick prese, and they went, being 19-year-old girls were very honest. That's pretty boring. There was a couple of interesting bits, and you can guess what the interesting bits were. So I'll stay away from the law. Jessica did very good summary of the legal position in respect of the duty to consult. I'm very much going to talk about this from you guys sitting at your desk at the council, trying to advise on this, having regard to the law, and more importantly, the get out of jail cards, which is read Andrew's book, failing which phone Andrew or get in touch with Emma and speak to one of our council friends, which we've availed ourselves of. Duty to consult, obviously, is set out in the legislation. I won't talk too much about the guidance. At the time the guidance was done, Solar had a seat at the group, which was led by COSLA and DTAS, and our views were very much not listened to, particularly on things like asset transfer, which I'll come to. So yeah, I'd love to rewrite that guidance, and it is very out of date given the case law, and it's maybe one which I can maybe go back. I'll take your offer, Andrew. So what causes us issues? I've noted in there any de minimis limits on a consultation. The reason I raised that is this is one that comes up quite a bit. I'm only leasing it for 12 months. Do I need to do a consultation? Oh no, I'm doing a license. That's not a lease. It's a license. That's not a disposal. Well, actually it is, because you're giving away the asset for a period of time. But I would refer back to the Angus case and that word common sense. There is nothing in the limit, de minimis, that says that there's exceptions for an example. It's a common good asset, but we're going to do 4 pop-up shops for 6 months. Am I going to do a community consultation for that? Strictly interpretation in terms of the law? Perhaps I should. Am I going to do it? No, because what's the point? It's about risk and common sense. So I think that's it as well. Public notices for land and building. My favourite story about public notices for land and building also relates to CPOs. Myself and our former surveyor, Aberdeen City Council, putting up CPO notices on a building. stapling them on, disposable camera from Boots, you can tell it was the 90s. And then went across the road to get a cup of tea, and as we're watching it, the kids are coming out of the high school, ripping the notices off. But I'm going to move on. As well, we've all got these stories about the effectiveness as well. So why are we doing it? Because the law tells us to do it. And we're obviously looking to seek authority for change of use or disposal. I'll not spend an awful lot on the legal precedents. Guild and Other versus Angus Council, extensively talked about. I remember speaking to colleagues from Angus about this at the time. The conveyancer in you inherently says, hold on. It's like, you built it on common good, and the court agreed. Very quickly on the guiding principles and Sedley, and also you will be aware that in terms of judicial review and challenge, that is a very fertile and very topical area. We've had several cases in that, not in respect of common good. We had a Highland Council decision very recently, very extensive opinion given by Lord Sanderson on what constitutes consultation, but very much referring back to the guiding principles. Aberdeen City Council was closing community facilities, again charged for lack of, it says, when I said this, back to front decisions, you've got to resist that where you have finance and members coming to you saying, we want to close, here's our estate, we're going to do a consultation. No, it's not back to front. It's that you have to make sure that, and you will be found out, as those judicial challenges have quite rightly done. If you don't do it properly, you're going to get found out, and very tempting. And that is the pressure on you as officers is, well, this is the route we're taking. Make the consultation fit. No, it ain't going to work, because we have people like Scott and communities that will challenge you, and quite rightly, and will win. And I'll come to judicial reviews from communities as well, which I'm actually becoming a bit of a fan of, which sounds strange in our seat. Governance. Again, if you don't get your governance right, that's another area that's going to open up challenge. Your scheme of delegation. It was mentioned there, very good point, I actually hadn't thought about as well. If you are changing your policy, you're right, we should be consulting on our common good policies. That should obviously probably fall into an area to be consulted upon if it's going to impact on how you deal with the common good. Have you got the authority to consult? Who are you getting it from? Is it from the committee? Is that a delegated power? And what are you consulting upon, and how are you going to do it? For me, it needs to be framed accurately. Andrew mentioned it. I think you should set out the options so that's quite clear to retain, dispose, etc. The temptation is just our option. Well, we're not setting out the options, we're just disposing of it, and then not doing that. But by doing that, that engages the public debate. The public are going to come back and challenge, and will come back and say, well, actually, we don't want you to sell. And if you don't mention that, it's self-evident they're going to come back with that. So why duck it? It's very unlikely. So when we do the, and I looked yesterday at some committee reports done with other with councils, and I think on the whole, I think they've been done very well in terms of the governance. Clear recommendations in clear language. Very clear summary of the responses, normally in a schedule to the report. And very clear what the risks are in terms of the options and the evidence. Again, comes back to judicial review. Crowdfunding for judicial review is very common. You're seeing it a lot in the planning sphere, which is an area I deal with as well. Just to finish a public local inquiry where we had 6 community councils and a community group who got formed as a SCIO, raised money, had their own councils and their own expert witnesses sitting alongside a wind farm inquiry. We're seeing more and more of that, but again, that's to keep you on your toes. Practical point of view, and not so much from legal officers, but other officers. First hint that you're facing a judicial review is the FOI for all internal correspondence. And you can't hide behind the shield of legal advice, because that can be challenged. but also it's what other officers have done with that legal advice and how other legal officers are there. So it's good if you are going to have something that's contentious, is make it clear to officers, be professional, set your advice out. If it is legal advice, set it out. It's not to be shared. It's for the relevant people, etc. So you can defend that position as well. And be aware that whatever you put, whether it's in a instant message, email, whatever, could end up in an FOI inquiry. And then there's various mechanisms, I won't go through that, to force that to be disclosed. But that's normally your first hint of a challenge. I'm now going to talk about a 16-year common good saga, Banff Canal Park. My boss, Patricia's here, who's been involved in this as well for the last, since 2011, me since 2012. My colleague, Jim McCly, going back to the original 2008 as well. So the most recent one was a sale to Morrison Supermarkets. Background to this is common good land. Interestingly, it's the same land. It's in the 1947 Duke of Fife gift, Magistrates of Banff. So there's no debate about it. We know exactly it's the Neilville common good land. And also there had been previous Court of Session applications. First was first sale to Tesco in 2008. That had an initial petition, went to the court appointed a reporter, I'll come to that in a minute, recommended for approval and was granted. The proceeds were to be used for, in that initial petition from 2008, for an existing sports facility as well. Tesco came back and said, we want to change the type of store, we want to change the deal. That was renegotiated. That required a new petition. That was renegotiated in 2012. The council's original community facility, that changed. So what the council decided to do was consult. This is when the council had more money. We had consultants that brought in that did the consultation for us. Loved, you know those old days 10, 12 years ago when council still had a little bit of money, as opposed to now you guys that have to do it as well. That outcome of that was spoke to the community, what we're going to do with these proceeds from Tesco. That's great. We're going to spend that money on 2 new sports facilities. Happy days. Lodge petition. Commercial world in supermarkets changed. Tesco decided to pull the plug on about 20 new stores across the UK, renegotiated with the council and paid a substantial settlement not to proceed with the contract. That left an interesting dilemma at the time. It's not part of the petition. We've got a large check, large 7-figure sums from Tesco. Is that common good funds? There was a bit of debate. Part of me was saying at the time was going, no, it's part of a contractual debate, so a contract with the council, but then again, it's inherently arise from common good. I would definitely say nowadays it is common good funds. Did we put the money back into the common good? Well, not straight away. What we did was we consulted with the community, did 2 brand new sports facilities and a few other bits and pieces, not as quite as big as originally envisaged, fairly substantial. The council also put in the balance of the funds. So we ended up with about £11 million worth of new sports facilities. Quite good as well. What next? Double bubble, as Del Boy would say. Let's sell it again, put it back in the market. Lovely jubbly. We now have someone else. Morrisons are going to buy it. Happy days. So why are we doing that? Well, finance thought we were going to recoup the money that we borrowed. It was their money, as in the council's, going into the and also supermarket would bring substantial economic benefits as well. After a bit of debate, very short debate, it was like, no, it's common good funds. Sorry. If we were going to do something about repaying the council, we probably should have done that at the time, set it out, etc. And this is all pre-consultation, pre the requirements under the Community Empowerment Act. So we're now reselling. That's Canal Park there. The facilities to the left there is actually a different sports facilities. Canal Park consisted of mainly the football pitch, a community centre. The community centre actually had been common good, sold to the government as a TA training centre, bought back, used as a community centre, but bought back by the district council, so had fallen out with common good. We still included it in the common good consultation because to take it out just didn't make sense in terms of jigsaw. There was redundant tennis court and basketball courts, and this is what we were consulting on. And then this was the issue. Talking about consultations, the practicalities, there is the legislation. I won't spend much time on that. But how did we consult? This was in 2020, 2021, great, middle of COVID. And this is probably not too difficult or different from what you guys are doing. Public consultation. We have an online platform. Engage Aberdeenshire, which we use for consultation. Facebook and other platforms. We had concerns about reaching out and engaging with those in the community that were not digitally or have huge digital presence. So to be fair, the area team who led on this, as much as possible, went to some groups like the local age concern groups, different groups that wouldn't have such a presence, and sent information to them so that they could return. Consultation ran from 30th of June. We ran it for 10 weeks. We ran it for an extra couple of weeks because there was such an interest in it. Also, that worked in quite well in terms of committee timescale. Like I said, it's complicated by COVID, so the ability to have face-to-face meetings was less. But the area team did run some meetings on Microsoft Teams. At the end of the consultation, roughly 30% were classified as supportive, and majority in terms of responding to the consultation didn't. There was a local group, Save Canal Park, set up, driven mainly by the football club and a couple of individuals. And I'm going to put my hands up as at the weekends, I coach minis rugby. You can never have enough pitches, so I have a little bit of sympathy on that front as well. They tried to lodge a petition, as noted, as I said, with 754 signatures. But in terms of the legislation, that's not a representation from an individual. It's a common thing, you get it in planning, etc. Petitions, you have to be very careful about it. However, we did feel as officers, it would be not fair to not mention it. So as it said, we noted it in the report that the petition was there so that members were aware of it, well, albeit obviously we're aware of it, but that it didn't form a formal representation in terms of the legislation. Interesting thing about petitions, I was actually asked to give an opinion on something recently where, although it relates to planning, you can see this happened in common good. Now what you're seeing is that you will have a community group will set up a website or a Facebook page. It will give you the option to go on, lodge a petition, and it will send an email directly to the relevant council email, and will give you options to object, and then a last bit to maybe put in your own individual grounds of objection. I looked at this, went on, logged on, lodged an objection, which just said banana, 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 phoned up my planning team, can you take that off? I'm just testing this. But what it did was it gave me an email back to my own email address confirming that I had an email and a copy of my objection. And although I don't think the planning service were very happy, I was quite content that was a valid objection because one, it came from identifiable email address, came from identifiable person with their postal address, and the fact that it gave a list of objections, that's no difference from the old-fashioned way when somebody went knocking on their doors and went, I've got these letters, do you want one to sign? Okay, so just a little, I don't know whether I'm right or wrong, but I think I'm fairly confident I'm right on that one as well. Initially, there was a newspaper poll that showed the opposite. It came out just before the committee papers were due. Took the view going, that's very informative, but I'm not actually going to mention that in the committee report. I was challenged on that, saying, well, you're being fair to the community, you mentioned their petition. I said, but at the end of the day, it's the Press and Journal, so no chance. So then what do we do next? We've got to have regard, conscientious consideration of the points raised. These are all the gunning principles, etc., that we talked about before. As process must be evident in your final decision. It's not a vote, though. The number, because this was a question that came up from members, the numbers responding either for or against are not a determining factor. I need to change my slider. Albeit the majority of the correspondents were against, it's not a vote. It's about that consideration and how do we deal with that. Well, this is what was put in. We quite freely put a balanced argument in front of members, and members put a recommendation. Members made the final decision. So to summarise the main points, loss of the football pitch. Well, we'd already provided brand new facilities. And again, I'll put my hand up. You can never have enough pitches. But we did get we approached Sports Scotland, who, as put in a consultation response, went, actually, no, for once, we're not bothered about losing a pitch because the council put in as well. Loss of green space. We do green space audits for every town. The town had a good as well, has a high level of green space, as you'd expect for a rural coastal town. Loss of jobs and impacts on local businesses. Actually, sequentially, it was a very good site. Quite strong economic benefit. There was only small stores, and the town was leaking to Murray Council. People were either going to shop in Elgin or Huntly more than 30 miles away. That's fine if you've got a car. It's also got a town that's got high deprivation area with people that don't have access to a car, which means they don't have access to cheaper shopping through a supermarket. The decision was taken to proceed and funds reinvested in the common good. And just when you think that'll be fine, so what was going to happen next? Well, we had a good, strong committee report. Contact Emma, get consultation with Scott, get Scott drafting a petition, and then say, can you put it on hold? We've got a slight issue. I'll come to that in a minute. In terms of the court, just a couple of observations. The court can agree to proceed with the sale. One thing that doesn't often come up, but had come up in the first petition from 2010, which is, and I think I'm still correct, the court can appoint a reporter to investigate and give a report back to the court, which is normally an advocate. And that's what we'd had in the original petition in 2010, just something to bear in mind. But also to bear in mind, which is that committee report is your foundation for your petition. So everything you need for the petition, you need to be doing it there. If you then start adding in more information to justify the petition, for me, you're raising a risk of, well, hold on, why didn't you have that in the initial consultation? So, like everything, get robust and get it done at the beginning. You can add a little bit more clarification, and Scott quite rightly asked for clarification for some of the points that were raised in the committee. But get your committee report right if you're then going to go on to do a disposal or change of use in the first place, and get your consultation right. And then this is where the saga ended, or maybe not. Delayed until March 2024. Sale eventually fell through, as is what happens is new SEPA flood maps came out. Suddenly the site what had an existing 2 consents for supermarkets, albeit had not been implemented and had now expired, were now no longer suitable in terms of planning. The same committee that approved it for disposal, wearing its statutory hat as the planning committee, refused it. And obviously Morrison's then exercised the right to withdraw from the missives. They did make a little bit of fuss about that. And again, I'm not teaching at suck eggs, but make sure when you're doing the disposal of common good, that you make provision that as a council, you wear many hats. So if you may have gone through you will agree to do the process, and any disposal will be subject to a common good order. You need to make it quite clear that you're not committing to that, etc. A point for debate, which is, what do you do first? Do you get the planning consent, or do you go and get the common good petition? Difficult one for a developer. am I going to spend £250,000 on a planning application when I've still got a common good order to come? Or then you're standing in front of my lords asking for a petition to be granted that's subject to planning. It's not an easy answer for that one as well. And also bear in mind from the community perspective, just because you didn't win the common good argument doesn't mean you're not going to lose the planning argument as well, just to make life more complicated. And just for a bit of interest, yeah, I mentioned the Invergordon Common Good case for the bust, which I did find extremely interesting, mainly because my dad is born and bred in Invergordon, lived there most of his life in Saltburn, part of Invergordon. And when I was home visiting him, he went, "Oi, what's this? What's this common good stuff? What's this about a bust?" Tried to explain 5 minutes, explaining about common good law to my dad. And then he went, "So what are we getting? 2.5 million? What's the other option?" Well, I think the option you could keep it and put it on display. I won't repeat what he said, but he very much lodged the objection. He very, very much was in the favour of the 2.5 million quid for Invergordon. That's great. Fantastic. What I will mention, however, and this is a bigger one, and you might have seen in the media a few years ago, which was in 2002, Aberdeenshire Council were approached to be told that we had a missing 16th century painting, The Pool of Bethesda by Paolo Veronese, which originally was in a palace in Italy, belonged to Catherine the Great. But at the end of in 1904, ended up in Peterhead or Buffnet Museum. If we ever find it, apparently it's worth about £13 million, but no sign of it has been, apart from some mention in some missives, sorry, some minutes from about 1910. We don't think anyone's walked away with it because apparently it's about that size and weighs about 1/4 ton. But unfortunately, we can't find it. But the one thing I was quite happy to say was, if we do find it, it's common good. It'll be a big boost for Peterhead. Unfortunately, I suspect, although I will not, this is my own opinion and not Aberdeenshire Council's, is I think it's either in a skip or somebody fancied the frame and it's got somebody's granny on it instead of the frill. So that's what it is. So that is a canter of the life of common good, which I think some of you will be able to relate to. And I will put my hand up and I will sort the spelling mistakes before I send the slides out. But anyway, thanks for listening to my rambles.
Thank you very much, Rob. I'm going to ask Scott and Mark to come back up to take questions that anyone's been thinking about. But just from my own point of view, I find that extremely useful. And I would say, I think both Andrew and Rob are completely correct that the awareness both of common good and of the potential ground of challenge of inadequate consultation are both very much on the up. So you need to take ultimate care in these matters. And as Andrew was saying, I'm aware, and I'll maybe try and put the references to these cases into the notes, but one consultation that was found to be inadequate was in relation to the Scottish Minister's guidance on housing land supply, and other case taken by Gladman against Scottish ministers. And funnily enough, one of the points about that was initially that they'd consulted over Christmas, which was thought to be maybe deliberate, but Andrew assures us it's just getting things off your desk at the last minute. And the other one, the Inverness case that Rob was talking about, I think it's Keynes trustees against Highland Council, was about the pedestrianisation or not of Academy Street in Inverness. So I'll put the reference to that because both of them do refer to the consultation, and you've heard a lot about the Gunning and Sedley principles. I sometimes get confused. They're exactly the same thing. They just come, one is the name of the case, Gunning, and the other is the name of the barrister, Sedley. So they're exactly the same thing. But I'm glad that everyone's referring it to Gunning and not giving Mr. Sedley any more publicity, because he actually has done something even better, which are the Sedley rules of litigation, which are the rules about what always goes wrong. And they have such things as, it's a rule that some pages will be omitted from the bundle, some pages will be stuck together, some things will be out of order. It's a much more amusing read than any of the other things. It's very useful. And also say, you know, common good matters can arise at any place, but probably most likely in city centres and to do with new development. And I've had that experience myself, and it's all a matter of risk really for both the council and the developer. One example being the new St James Quarter, where the developer discovered after some very good, again, title searches that there were some slivers of land around there that hadn't been owned by anyone since before the new town was built and had been gifted to the city. So as a precaution, the developer did lodge a Section 75 petition to get those slivers of land into their ownership via the council before they invested a pound or two in a lovely landmark building at the end of George Street that everyone can see from everywhere. And the other one was ourselves. The Lay Hall beneath Parliament Hall, there was a question about the ownership of that, and the faculty decided to lodge an a non domino disposition by one of the members of the faculty staff claiming ownership of the Lay Hall, and then relied on for 10 years. And then I know there are some people from Edinburgh City Council, they did think about and did lodge a summons to suggest that that wasn't okay because it was maybe common good land. And it's the only time I've had to look at documents signed by Mary Queen of Scots suggesting she was gifting the land to the people of Edinburgh, but as it had been used by the faculty since, I think, Parliament united the United Kingdom in 1715, so nearly 300 years. At the end, it disappears. So anyone who comes along to the planning group drinks, be reassured you're not trespassing on the common good land of Edinburgh, and you can enjoy your drinks without worrying about that. But with that introduction, I know there's one question. I don't know if you want me to ask it, or one question from the floor in advance. And I think it's mainly directed to probably Andrew from his previous practice, but more recently, Rob, the question of the register of common good land. And obviously that's an important matter, what goes into the records and how is that compiled or policed?
For a start, it never ends. As in, you will never have a definitive register by the very nature of common good land. Since you mentioned about Mary Queen of Scots, we're looking at Inverurie Town Hall. We couldn't find a title for it, but by a process of elimination, the only title could be the one that flowed from Mary Queen of Scots to the borough as predecessors. And my colleagues Jim and Chris and the conveyancing team did a huge amount of work in compiling what they thought was the register and did an excellent job in it. But it went out, there was consultation on it, there was some consultation feedback, there was some challenges, some were accepted, the majority didn't constitute enough of a challenge to change the conveyancing opinion on the common good. So they should never be considered as a definitive list. They are almost a good starter for 10 as well. And actually, in all the talk about consultation, we didn't talk about consultation on them as well, because there is an obligation to consult on them as well. And you will eventually get closer to having a definitive list, but it will never be there in all time, because there is always new information we discovered in relation to property and common good. But they were welcome parts of piece of work, huge piece of work to do and compile. I have to put my hands up, as with other local authorities, we didn't. Very few of us managed to do them in the timescales as envisaged by the Scottish Government, which we told them at the time. So these should be looked at as a good starting point. And if you get any other further issues that anything's missing, there's still an opportunity, and always will be an opportunity, to revisit them.
Yeah, thank you, Andrew.
Very briefly, in terms of learning from your mistakes, I mean, I was involved in the 5 common good register for my sins, although it was other colleagues that did the brunt of the hard work. And one thing I did learn from that when I was helping out with another council's common good register more recently is try and future-proof things. And particularly where you're saying something isn't common good, actually this other council decided to publish everything, including justifications as to why something wasn't common good. But whether you publish that bit or not, it's very handy for when people have moved on. And in the case of Fife, my former colleague Keith, who we were talking about earlier over coffee, was a lovely chap, but he was quite old school in terms of technology, and everything was written down in sheets. So I don't know if we've still got these sheets, Ewan, but probably better if you can do it digitally. And then when the next generation of sufferers of common good come along, and then they can see why. And I think it's guidance rather than legislation says we should be reviewing it every 5 years. So I imagine there'll be a few community activists that will be holding us to that shortly, at which point in those 5 years, as I say, people may have moved on to other and hopefully better things than worrying about common good.
Thank you. Do we have any other questions? In which case, Emma's got that roving mic to help us record the question as well as the answer, because it sometimes helps to understand the answer.
Yeah, my question is for Rob, actually, and it's about the transaction with Tesco and that ultimately fell through. I'm just curious as to, did you consider a long-term lease with Tesco? Because it seems to me that might have been a better option for both parties, because it provides revenue for the council. It's maybe a simpler thing for Tesco to do. They won't necessarily want to run a supermarket there for 100 years, and also it doesn't erode the land bank of the common good.
I don't think it would have made much difference to the community's response, because ultimately, even if you did a 30, 10, 20, 30, 50 or 100-year lease, you were taking away the football pitches. So in terms, I don't think it would have made much difference in terms of that view. In terms of doing long leases, that's interesting, and I'll just very quickly pick up. If you're doing asset transfers, there is, and it involves common good, you think the compromise would be to do a long lease, because that will keep people happy. Ultimately, the property will come back to the council. However, the lottery funders who I've spoken to directly are very adamant. They will not fund any projects unless it's outright land acquisition. And I've asked the question in a couple of forums going, what's the difference between a 100-year lease and an outright disposition? Because you're right, for a commercial operator, not a lot. In fact, that's pretty much what they're used to when they're operating down in south of the border. But that's just strict view. It's the very much, that's our policy. Computer says no. As when it comes to asset transfer. Sorry to slip into that, but you just trigger something there.
Any other questions? Yep. The back row.
This is actually me just taking full advantage of everybody being here. So in the legislation, when you petition the court to alienate common good land, there's a bit that says, and any other conditions which the court may decide. Our clients often ask and members, what could that look like? And to be honest, the court team's answer is always whatever the sheriff decides it might look like. So I was just wondering if you have any examples of where conditions might have been put on a petition.
Yeah, it's a difficult one sometimes, because by suggesting a condition in the petition, you might be putting something into the court's mind that might actually restrict what your client wants to do in due course. So I think you have to be quite careful about pleading possible conditions in advance. In my experience, for what it's worth, is it tends to be judge-led. They tend to say, what about, which is not to say you can't anticipate what the court might say. A common one is that the monies that are derived from the disposal are conditionalised into putting them back into the common good fund, which a lot of local authorities will be doing anyway as a matter of practice. But I've certainly had that experience of the court saying, well, it has to go back into the common good fund. There may be other conditions the court might look at imposing. For example, if it's a long lease or a lease, the court might say it's concerned about assignability of the lease and it wants to make sure that only the tenant that you refer to in the pleadings will be the tenant. You know, a good example might be the not uncommon situation of a community interest group acquiring, let's say, an old pavilion in a park. They want to run it as a cafe and a drop-in centre. And the court may say that's fine, but we don't want that group to then assign it or sublet it to a pub, you know, to take a perhaps extreme example. So there may be areas like that, but my experience certainly is that these are areas you probably flesh out in discussion in advance of drafting the petition so that your client has given instructions on what they're prepared to live with and what they're not prepared to live with. One condition I remember being imposed years ago by a lady clerk, and it was a park in Edinburgh where we wanted to lease it to, I think, the proverbial rugby club. And she put a condition in that at the end of the lease, which would be 100 years, it would revert to the common good. I'm not entirely sure about the competence of that, but I'm not going to be around in 100 years' time, I imagine. So I took the view it was someone else's problem. I think it's an exercise in anticipating the likely concerns the court might have and having a position so that you're not wrong-footed when you're in front of the judge and they're proposing something, you're thinking, oh, crikey, I've not thought about that.
On a related theme, perhaps not so much a condition, but I was involved in one case where the authority wanted to dispose of certain, appropriate some land on which it would build some public sector housing, and the authority wanted by preference that to be held on the housing revenue account rather than as part of a common good funds, and the court was happy to accept that as part of a disposal the new property would be transferred to the HRA out of the common good fund. There was an alternative prayer in the petition that failing which then it will be allocated to a common good fund. So they allowed the housing to be built, and they also allowed the land on which the housing was built to be allocated to the housing account and out of the common good fund.
I don't have much to add. I mean, I think that certainly any of the cases I've known about, it's been the money must be transferred to common good fund. I think the other most likely one is if you are disposing a public park to, say, the rugby club, that condition that you preserve some sort of public access might be something else you would encounter, but I've not really encountered much else.
Okay, I think we had another couple of questions on the left-hand side. Sorry.
Sorry, just to go back to Andrew's opinion on your private golf club and specifically the area that was acquired for statutory purpose but may have later become common good. Would it impact your view at all if the local authority had taken no steps to lay it out as public recreation ground until after 1975?
Yeah, it's an interesting one, isn't it? I mean, in that case, the golf club had been going for 100 years, and you know it'd always been dedicated to a private golf club. It is difficult, isn't it, when you think at what point is common good? You know, can you dedicate stuff and so on when you're in the district council days? What could they do that would affect the common good status or otherwise of it? I think if it had been dedicated after 1975, it's still the guardians of the common good. And again, if others have different views, please chip in, but the custodians of the common good have dedicated it to a recreational purpose for longer than the prescriptive period. It's not quite time immemorial. I mean, I can remember 1975 just about, so it's not time immemorial, but it's yeah, it kind of looks like it's been dedicated for much more than the prescriptive period. It might be quite difficult to say it wasn't common good.
Question, second review.
Thanks. I was going to ask about leases, and you did say there was no de minimis limit for leases, but I was wondering if the purpose of the lease makes any difference. For example, providing, a lease to provide public facilities in a park.
I think about that. I wouldn't probably say probably. Yeah. So you get back to that point, which I think Andrew and Nat made earlier, which is that if you're not really changing the use, then it's probably not that something that needs to be consulted upon or would require a disposal. I think so. It's a question: has that changed? But even though it's something you're dedicating to public use, it's a question of degree, in fact, in the circumstances, which is the joy of common good. There's never a clear answer. I'm just trying to think of a situation. So if I've got something that was dedicated, a pavilion that the rugby club used, they no longer use it because they built a new pavilion and a new community group come in and they are using it as a drop-in shelter to support mental health. That's a laudable public use, but that's a change in use. So probably we need to consult. I suppose here's the usual common good answer. You'll have to think about it.
I wrote an opinion a while ago for local authority on that very point, and pretty much my answer is along the lines that Rob suggested. I think if you look at some of the 19th century case law, there's discussion there of alienation of the subjects to the prejudice of the community. And I think if it's a like for like thing, that, the example where it's a rugby club and it's going to be another rugby club and that's the established use, then you could take the view that's not to the prejudice of the community. But again, it is fact and degree. That perhaps fits with what Gilt's saying as well about the community likely to have a view on this. And if it's an established use, then it changes as the use changed. But it's all bound up with things like the length of the lease and so on as well. But again, yeah, fact and degree, I think, comes into it more.
Any final? Yes, one.
Apologies for having the last question, but Andrew, you dropped a wee tantalising taster about your third edition of the book. And then you're quite blunt and you dropped the bombshell about an hour ago and said, yes, you can actually move something into the common good today. Well, wait a minute, that doesn't actually fit into your convenient flowchart, which appears in your excellent second edition of your book, and also will have to appear as a 2-page edition in the third one. We'll have to say, however, you can now do the following. Because in Edinburgh, just to make us sound like pruby souls, we've got the unique situation of having 4 boroughs. I'm just checking with my colleagues, I'm right here: Edinburgh proper, Leith, Portobello and Queensferry. But not only that, our borough has got bigger and bigger, just to be annoying over time, which confuses and annoys our colleagues in the estates team who are trying to look at our common good register. What do you mean that is, but that isn't? Well, it's very complicated. I'll put my glasses on and tell you. But we've got one unique one, which I will never find an answer to, and I might have to send you the details, but this is one where we bought a bit of land in the south of Edinburgh, specifically to put a big park recreation facility in there. But we got it from an entailed estate, some landed people in Aberdeenshire, in fact, of Rob's chums. And because it was an entailed estate, we had to get an act of parliament to extract it. And part of the deal, the horse trading back then, was we would extend the borough only if we got permission to buy it. So it's a chicken and egg. It wasn't part of the borough when we contracted and went to Parliament to buy it, but it only became common good because it was borough. But which comes first? If we hadn't got it, the borough wouldn't have existed that far out. So, I mean, it's not a real question. I'm just chucking that in there for discussion, because that can maybe be part of your third edition. And if you'd like to maybe mention my name there.
Yeah, I mean, just very briefly, Alasdair. I think I should stress that this bombshell I've dropped about, well, it could be acquired for statutory purpose, but it morphs into common good. I'm really talking about a long period of dedication to a common good use and the statutory purpose basically having been exhausted. Yeah, it probably mucks up my wee diagram, but yeah, I wouldn't be too alarmed. It was a particular set of circumstances, and it's nobody's tested my opinion in court, so it might be rubbish.
Thank you. I'm just looking at the time. I'm not going to discourage any more questions, but I am going to make the condition that anyone who wants to ask further questions comes next door and participates in the drinks that are on offer. And they're also on offer to those who don't want to ask questions about common good, and even those who don't want to speak about common good and would rather just spend some time with their colleagues and discuss other matters. So you're all welcome next door for a drink. Just in concluding, I was sitting having a sandwich for lunch up in Parliament House this afternoon. I was speaking to a very senior colleague, council, and saying I was coming to do a seminar or take part in a seminar on common good. And he said, wow, common good law is completely incomprehensible, which is probably not that surprising, other than the fact that he was counsel for one of the parties in the Portobello Park case. So he was tempted to come down. Unfortunately, he hasn't, but hopefully those of you who have attended have learned a little bit to make it slightly more comprehensible, or if not, at least you know where to come to ask the questions that you want to know the answers to. So finally, if you just all like to join me in thanking our speakers today, and we'll see you next door.